Okay, so here we go. I'm usually talking about central bank, lowering rates, raising rates, liquidity and all of that stuff from a West perspective. But this week, we also had some interesting news out of China. China, historically speaking, a very pro-deflationary country. You've seen it with the way they handle their key interest rates, with the way the national bank is essentially always preparing to flood more economical power. China has immense growth in the last 25 years. But last year, they sort of did an oopsie. They had a real estate bubble pop, and quite a big one, and they had to counteract. In China, this usually means that towards the end of the year, essentially mainly in Q4, they are easing the system with liquidity. I'll insert a graphic here now for you in full screen, where you can actually see the patterns of what has been going on each quarter, each year, how it correlates, and compared to Bitcoin, what kind of an impact this had. And we always hear that the next bull run will essentially start in Asia. If we now look at the data today and compare it to 2023, so last year, you can kind of see a similar pattern. Last year, towards the end of the year, the pump was mainly driven by the anticipation of the spot Bitcoin ETFs. We now have those. They are, safe to say, a success in the financial industry, and it has slowly adopted everywhere else. Hong Kong has ETFs, Australia has ETFs, we have ETPs in Europe, which are a bit older and not as much traded, but that's a different story. And looking at the situation now, the Chinese National Bank is ready to flood the system with $140 billion, an immense sum. And if that sum is getting back into the system, it's only a matter of time until people start to allocate. And considering where we are now compared to a year ago, it would be quite easy for them to allocate small portions of their portfolio towards Bitcoin. Whether that be in an ETF or whether that be in Bitcoin directly, that remains to be seen. However, with that historical likeness of deflation, and they basically want to power the economic output as much as possible, this could become an interesting thing out of Asia. And the question remains whether the liquidity will actually flow. But just looking at the past and deciphering a bit whatever China's doing there, we might be in for a potential China-driven Bitcoin run, which we haven't seen so far. If they actually want to go a step further, they just need to look a bit south into Bhutan, who are using a third of their GDP in Bitcoin, which is a crazy amount. They have double the amount of El Salvador in Bitcoin on the national treasury. They are doing great in terms of energy. China has that same potential. If they now flood the system and investors start to actually allocate towards Bitcoin, which we all know essentially they do find their way into it, and they realize like, this little country in the south is essentially doing the same, but just on a smaller scale, and we can do the same thing, you might see a crazy adoption wave in China. At this point, this is just pure speculation, this video. So take everything I say here with a grain of salt. This is obviously no financial advice or anything, but it's an interesting thing to discover. And for once, we might actually see that the prophecy fulfills itself, where it says that the next bull run could really start in Asia.